Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. I know we beat the horse about budgeting and spending at the state level often, but you know, as a senior policy analyst at the Idaho Freedom Foundation, Fred Birnbaum has pointed out, sometimes there are situations that suggest action. Hey, we might have to pull over here pretty soon. The kids are sounding like they need a bathroom break or something. And then there are situations that require action. Okay, the slowing the roll on Idaho spending, that's one that requires some action. We're going to tell you why it's required as well as how we can accomplish this coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Now, you may be feeling like, okay, everything's expensive. I pay a lot of taxes, but it's the price you pay for living in a great state like Idaho. And you know what? Idaho is a great state. Okay, we wouldn't bother to fight for it if it wasn't a terrific place to live. But Idaho, despite its conservative reputation, still has a governor and a legislature that are learning fiscal responsibility. And this is not because they're bad or they're evil people. It's more along the lines of, well, this is how everybody else does it, so therefore it must be right. But there is a proper role for government, which means there are proper upper limits to its powers, including what it can do, what it can spend, because it doesn't create wealth, it doesn't create money, it can only take from the people that it supposedly is representing and protecting and guaranteeing their God-given rights. So let's talk about why we need to stop Idaho's spending spree. It's a great state. It should continue to be a great state, but it's not going to continue if we keep on the same path where spending continues to grow out of control as it has over the past half a decade or so. So let's dive in here. I'm going to pick on a couple of really great brains that we have at our disposal. Brett Ferrugia is the budget policy analyst for the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Brett has taken direct aim at how we stop spending. And it's how do you get this under control? How do you end this out of control spending? Well, Brett says, look, the Idaho state budget is out of control, and it's the Idaho Freedom Foundation's duty to the citizens of this state to fight big government spending wherever and whenever possible. But even after accounting for the governor's 3% holdback, remember that earlier this year, agencies still have requested $14.5 billion for government operations in fiscal year 2027. I know, well, it's just money, but that's your money. Do you understand that? Does that connection make there? It's wholly unacceptable considering that spending should only be about $12.7 billion, even adjusted for inflation and population growth since 2019, before the COVID-19 related spending surge. So if there's a goal that we're shooting for, getting back to pre-COVID spending levels might be a good place to start. But let's talk about reducing spending. Brett tells us that the Idaho Freedom Foundation's plan to reduce spending is multifaceted, and he actually is writing a series, and you can check these out at idahofreedom.org, that outline the major pillars of this plan. So the plan is to reduce government spending, first of all, by eliminating wasteful and unconstitutional spending. In other words, things government shouldn't be doing as its proper role in the first place, and then also repealing Medicaid expansion. Now, I know that's, you want to turn your backs on the needy and the poor. What about all the able-bodied people who are being added to those roles and increasing that burden on the taxpayers? That doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, we need to limit that for the people who actually need it and not make it so readily available like it's the answer to waking up every day with fresh, minty breath and sparkling teeth. Anyway, preparing a budget that returns the state to pre-COVID spending adjusted for inflation and population growth. We can get back to pre-COVID spending. Again, we could still make other things less necessary as far as government goes, but somebody's got to slow the roll. And I think Brett does a good job of eliminating. This is how we do it. We eliminate unconstitutional, wasteful programs. So far, by the way, the Idaho Freedom Foundation, remember when the Doge task force started working here at the state level? We suggested nearly $380 million in savings for the state. And I mean detailed. We could do this, we could do this. And consequently, that would save the taxpayers that $380 million in savings. But, is anybody interested? I think the taxpayers may be. How about the governor? How about the lawmakers who appropriate those taxes as funding? Well, that's part of our problem here. Secondly, repeal Medicaid expansion. Here's why. This program was supposed to cost the state of Idaho $400 million. But when it expanded, hey, it's free money. There's no such thing as free money. Nothing comes from the federal government for free. And the states end up picking up costs along the way. And since the Medicaid expansion, that cost has ballooned to more than $1.3 billion. Yeah, you grabbed your pocketbook, didn't you? Yeah, that kind of stuff hurts. So next, Brett talks to us about how do we end bureaucratic excess in Idaho. And here he'll break it down in a little more detail. So one of the things we can do to keep from funding the Department of Redundancy department, with taxpayer money is consolidate. Now, the Idaho Freedom Foundation found numerous bureaucratic agencies and commissions that serve nearly the same purposes. And each one of these agencies or commissions becomes an entrenched interest, and then it's deceptively difficult to dislodge. I mean, would you want to, cut off your efforts to continue receiving funding, for that? Efficiency really isn't, it's not a priority when you're doing what you're doing with other people's money. And sadly, that's just human nature. It's, that's how government operates. Now, for example, Idaho currently has 3 separate councils and commissions for the deaf and blind, each with its own agency. You've got the Vocational Rehabilitation State Council for the deaf and hard of hearing, the Department of Education's Idaho Services for the blind or for the deaf and blind, and the Commission on the Blind and Visually Impaired in the Executive Office of the Governor. Yeah, that does seem a little redundant. So consolidating those would save the Idaho taxpayers millions of dollars, which could be passed on to the taxpayer. Here's another one. And this one kind of has its roots in that, we got to be inclusive of everybody. How about direct elimination of wasteful and unconstitutional programs? So let's start with the launch program that cost to Idaho taxpayers $74,853,700 this year, but is really beyond the constitutional authority of the state. It's essentially a state subsidy for businesses that want to train and support their employees at the taxpayer's expense. Great thing if you're one of those businesses that's getting that handout. But if you're not, well, it seems like kind of a perversion of the free market. And again, government going into areas where it shouldn't be. Even if you stay in the narrow category of education, there's also the Idaho Digital Learning Academy, that's $26.7 million, and the Ineffective State Literacy Intervention Program, $72.8 million. So Brett says the former of these should be eliminated. The latter should be cut and restructured entirely. But further savings could come from eliminating unconstitutional agencies that promote DEI and that inclusivity, like the Hispanic Commission and Library Commission. Think about how some of the culture battles are being fought based on, we've got to stake out this little bit of territory for government favors for this select group of people or this select tribe of people. Government is supposed to represent us equally. That's what equal treatment before the law is. We don't see that so much today. You can thank wokeness for that. But as Brett points out, cutting government waste is always tougher than it sounds. The Idaho Freedom Foundation works tirelessly to cut that waste. But even something as simple as a name is a tool that's designed to prevent people from reining in that spending. And this is a great point. Who would want to get rid of such a thing as the Idaho Digital Learning Academy? I mean, that's got to be one of the greatest things we could give our kids. But the IDLA functions as little more than a state-run IT company, with a handout for educators and a handout rather for educators with little return. So if you attack a concentrated interest like IDLA with a diffuse, multifaceted base, such as the legislature, that's a classic problem in political science. Brett says the interest finds it much easier to defend itself being rigid and concentrated than it is to rally the legislature to attack it. So the legislature is made up of lots of lawmakers with lots of different priorities, which often means that they're slow to act. But our task at the Idaho Freedom Foundation is to use our power and our experience to be the voice of the people of Idaho in overcoming this structural problem for the good of the citizens of Idaho. Okay, this is not about we're going to go around imposing goodness on everybody. It's about keeping government limited so that mischief and for that matter, wasteful or fraudulent spending doesn't take place. And the bottom line is our focus continues to be on eliminating as much waste as possible, as well as enacting real change for the taxpayers of Idaho in 2026. Now, we're going to be talking about it more because this is going to be one of the big issues. It's, as I mentioned earlier, Fred Birnbaum points out there's some times where, action is suggested. There's times when it's required. The state is facing a deficit right now. And the governor, well, I don't know. How do we make up for that deficit? It's a pretty safe bet. He's probably not thinking, we should probably cut spending. And I mean, really cut it. I wonder how else he could make up for that deficit or that shortfall. I don't want to think about it too hard because I think we all know where that kind of thinking heads. So, aren't you glad you have somebody in your corner? By the way, I want you to put this on your calendar. Monday, December 8th. A very, very important press conference will be held by the Idaho Freedom Foundation in Boise. If you get the chance to attend in person, great. If you want to check it out afterwards, I'm sure we will have it available for you. But we're going to lay out some of the priorities for the coming legislative session in the coming year. And I think you will find that these are things that are not only timely and necessary, but actually do something to further the cause of freedom and help restore your ability to make more of your own decisions, whether it's for your own freedoms or your own money and how it's put to use, and to bring government back into its proper role, which is very simply to protect your God-given rights and mostly stay out of the way. I know that's anathema to what a lot of people, even conservatives or even Republicans or rhinos, might think about what government's supposed to do. So with that in mind, that is why it's so important that we rein in the spending. But the great gem state spending spree's got to come to an end. How'd you like to help us? You can go to idahofreedom.org to find out more. And again, this is the place where action is required. So why don't you be a part of that solution? I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.